Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Facebook Live and launch of our new clinical leadership program. Tonight's event is called Fly Higher, and our fantastic speaker is with us now. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening. Hello. Welcome. Well, thank you everyone for coming along.
No, look, thank you for your support. Have you braved the weather today? Are you safe and sound at home?
Safe and sound at home. Yes, braved the weather. Feeling very proud of myself for dealing with another winter.
Well, look, fantastic. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, Sarah is doing her presentation from home tonight. So if we have any technology issues, please bear with us. And I promise you, we'll sort them out as soon as possible. Tonight's event does count towards your CPD and revalidation. So we will send you a link to download the certificate just before the end of tonight's event. As Sarah will agree, the more engaged you are, the more involved you are, the better it is for the event. So please leave comments, let us know where you are watching from. And please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to type them into the comment section, and we'll endeavour to answer as many of them as possible before the end of tonight's event. As I said, tonight is the launch of our new CLP, the Clinical Leadership Programme. This is off the back of an incredible launch we did in Lower Limb 3 years ago, where we have thousands of members in the community, and it's genuinely seen as a safe space to share cases, to network, to share education, and to hang out with friends in the community. For tonight, we've listened to you. We've built something for you. This is for all healthcare professionals working in ostomy and continence. We have free content, both clinical and personal development, like tonight's event. We have live events, both on our website and through our Facebook page. We have a revalidation zone that's free for all your revalidation needs. And we have an ongoing networking community on our Facebook site within UCCT. So please join now. I'm hoping that the URL will come up on the session now, which is clp-hub.com. And before I start, just a massive thank you to our partners for this, who are Convatec. And without your passion, without your commitment to independent education, this event and this new platform and program simply could not and would not happen. So a massive thank you on behalf of me and my team for your support. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Ed. So yeah, delighted to be here. I was invited to come and talk to you about resilience. So maybe I should explain a little bit about who I am, first of all, so you know where I'm coming from. I spent 21 years in the Royal Air Force as a helicopter pilot. So I understand what it is to serve others. And I trained as a mindfulness coach and cognitive behavioral therapist towards the end of my career, when I decided to leave and do new things. And that's what I do now. I do executive coaching and also motivational speaking. So Ed asked me to come along and talk about resilience. And I'll be honest, whenever I'm asked to come and speak to people like you, I know we love to talk about imposter syndrome, right? But I do get imposter syndrome a bit, because I think, what on earth have I got to say about resilience that you don't already know? You're the most resilient, tough, strong, impressive people that I can possibly think of. And, you know, I really mean that. I don't just say that to everyone. So I think actually, though, that's the point, right? I think I'm kind of making an assumption here, but I think that when you're a very strong, resilient person, it's really easy for people to take that for granted, and just to imagine that, you know, it's all really easy because you make it look easy. And I can certainly relate to that. I spent 21 years in the military. There were lots of times I had to be quite tough. And people used to always say to me, "Oh, but Sarah, you're just so strong." And I'm thinking, yeah, but I don't feel that strong. So I guess this is, you know, where I'm coming at it tonight, is that I know that probably people are used to relying on you being really strong, and it's easy to forget. But actually, this is our chance just to give back, say thank you. And I want to share some of the things that I learned during my military career that helped me to stay strong and helped to keep a smile on my face as well. So let me begin. I want to take you to probably the toughest military training exercises of my career. It's called resistance to interrogation. And if that sounds awful, it's because it is. Now, it's a very tragic thing that we go to war. I know that I don't need to remind anybody of that tonight, and I don't want to dwell on it, but unfortunately in the military, that is part of our life. And if we go to war and we get captured by, hostile forces, it's going to get really unpleasant for us, okay? So we had to train for this. And the way we trained for it is we practiced it. We practiced being interrogated and tortured. So it was pretty awful, but it's a really good example of when I had to be incredibly resilient. And I picked up some quite good tips. So imagine the scene. I'm hoping you can now see a dark, wintry scene, probably not too dissimilar to what we can see outside. We used to go and do this training down in Dartmoor, and you'd spend about 2 weeks on the run from, enemy forces, hostile forces. And inevitably, you would get very cold, wet, hungry, soggy, and thoroughly peed off. And eventually, you'd be captured, and they'd take you off to this prison cell, and they'd interrogate and torture you. Now, obviously, they're not really going to beat you up, but they've got ways of making the training pretty realistic. And I have to say, I was absolutely dreading this. But I had heard from the stories that circulated that one of the first things that happens when you get captured is that they strip you down to your underwear. And I had this particularly ridiculous pair of superhero underpants that I was quite fond of. And I decided on a whim that I was going to wear these pants. I don't really know what I was hoping for. I think instinct just told me it was a choice that would serve me at some point down the line. And it worked. I remember I was there, my captors were kind of mid-jeer, as it were. And these pants were revealed, and all of a sudden they were speechless. They didn't know what to make of it. And if I'm not mistaken, one of them was suppressing the urge to smile. And I remember standing there sort of shivering in my underwear thinking, you know what, you can choose if I eat today, you can choose if I sleep, you can even choose if I go to the loo, right? But you don't get to choose what pants I put on this morning. And standing there shivering in that cell, I felt, strong, and I felt powerful. And so that's the point. I think, we are capable of being incredibly strong so long as we remember to make choices. And it doesn't have to be the most life-changing choice. It can be a trivial one like what pants you put on. But I think as long as we remember that we have a choice and we make choices, we can feel incredibly strong, right? But it would be disingenuous to say that, well, once I figured that out, life was rosy and I never, ever had another bad day. Because the thing is that we kind of forget, right? We forget we have a choice. And unfortunately, because of the way life is, we usually forget that just about the time that we need to remember it most, i.e. we usually forget this when we need to be our most resilient. And I remember that's when I was deployed to Afghanistan. I was deployed to Afghanistan, as you can probably tell, over the Christmas period. And I was in charge of 120 people. The mission was to support the Afghan government forces and get people safely from A to B. So think of us as a battle taxi. And I was in charge of all of the people and all of the support elements that went into delivering that mission. And I was really proud to be selected to do this operational command. And I was proud to be doing it over Christmas, because, I felt like that was a time when, you really got to be a good leader. You've got to step up because people are separated from their family. There was just one problem. In this photograph, which I hope you can see, there's a little adorable boy who's getting ready for bed next door, actually. That's my son, Arthur, and he's just about to turn 2 in this picture. And that's taken 2 days after Christmas Day. And he is in the mobile van for the Radio 4 show. And Radio 4 were running a show about parents that were deployed, and they decided to interview me in Kabul and then interview Arthur, and we were going to have a little conversation over the airwaves. But that wasn't the problem. The problem is that stood next to me in Kabul, also taking part in the same radio show, was his father. So as far as I was concerned, in that picture, my son was an orphan because both of his parents were deployed to a war zone over Christmas. And I wasn't cool with that, if I'm honest, but I didn't really feel like I had a choice because, I knew what I'd signed up for when I joined the military. I knew what it meant when I decided to go back to the front line after having Arthur, and everyone else were separated from their family at the same time. So, you know, they needed a leader who was strong, right? And I didn't feel like I had a choice. But I can tell you that I didn't always feel that strong. In fact, I kind of felt like I was clinging on with my fingernails. And that's what I mean. Like, often the times when we feel like we need to be most resilient is the times when we kind of feel less resilient, right? But I felt like I did all right. You know, I got through, I did a pretty decent job. But when I got home, I learned that I had earned myself a nickname. And they were calling me Jekyll and Hyde, because I'd been a bit moody. I had good days and I had bad days. And when I reflected on this, I realized that, you know, they were right. Okay. There had been times when I'd kind of run out of capacity a little bit, and I probably snapped at someone, or I wasn't quite as, you know, congenial as I wanted to be. In fact, I remember a really vivid memory was when I was just about to go and fly a mission, and I got a WhatsApp from my brother. And he texted me, he was outside my house in Maidenhead, and he said, "Oh, I'm ringing on the doorbell to get your au pair to take her to the station. She's not answering. What can you do?" And I remember thinking, I can't do anything. I'm in Kabul. You're going to have to sort this out, right? So these are the sorts of things that I was kind of dealing with. But anyway, I thought, look, give me a break here. I've done the best I can. I tried to be the best leader I could be. I worked really hard at, at this. Okay, I had some bad days, but actually, think of the sacrifice I've made. And I'm saying that because I'm sure it must be the same for you. The sort of, work that you put in behind the scenes, and it must feel pretty crummy if you don't feel like you're getting the recognition. And I remember at that point, I kind of made a decision that I wasn't going to be happy until someone recognized, what my contribution had been. And someone said thank you and said that, I'd been a hero. And of course, that didn't happen. And I'll tell you why. Because other people have got their stuff to deal with, right? And I was getting angry about things that were in my circle of concern. So that's what you can see there. The red circle is our circle of concern. And these are all the things that we care about, that we're concerned about. So what other people think about us, what people say, what they feel about us. These are all things that we care about, but ultimately we don't really control. And I was very much stuck in my circle of concern, sort of waiting for someone to change their behavior or change how they thought about me so that I could feel good about myself. And the longer I waited, the more angry I felt, but the more powerless I felt. Do you ever do that? Do you ever kind of just get a bit bogged down with other people's choices? And, that's not to say that other people don't trigger us and that, we don't deserve to be treated well, but it's just one of these infuriating situations where you realize you're just utterly stuck on the outside of your circle of influence. And then I kind of remembered the superhero pants. And I thought, why did I feel so strong in one scenario where really all the odds were stacked against me? There's no reason I should have felt strong. Why did I feel so strong there, but I feel so fragile and vulnerable here? And I realized it was because, when I put those superhero pants on, I basically stepped into my circle of influence, because I, made a choice over something that I had some influence over. And our circle of influence is kind of everything that we do, everything we say, but also, the mindset that we choose and the way we choose to respond to things. And when I put those pants on, I chose to respond to something with a bit of cheekiness, basically. So I think the point is that when we are in uncertain times and we feel that we need to be really resilient, it's really important to step into our circle of influence. And the best way to do that is to make a choice over something that we have some influence over. And like I say, that could just be a mindset of, what, I'm actually rocking it. And people can say what they like about me, which is, easy to say, hard to do, but we can do it if we try. But I wanted to give you a little bit more, because I know sometimes it's easy to be like, well, just get into a circle of influence. So how do we actually do that? And I discovered that actually a really simple way to get into our circle of influence and exercise choice in our life is in the words that we use. And I discovered that the words we use can really kind of empower us, and it can help us to exercise choice where we didn't realize we had choice. And I discovered this in quite an interesting way. So when we were in the military, we used to study aircraft accidents and incidents, not because of some gory kind of morbid fascination, although there was a bit of that, but it was actually because we could learn from previous people's mistakes and hopefully we wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. And I remember there was one particular case study that really kind of stuck in my mind. And it's not because it was the most interesting case study, and it wasn't a very severe one. I'm happy to say all the crew were fine. It's because of the way the instructor who was leading the session framed it. So this is a classroom-based activity, and we'd be sitting in the classroom and we'd be listening to the cockpit voice recording. And the instructor said, I want you to listen to the conversation between the crew of the aircraft, and I want you to tell me what the navigator is feeling, right? So this was the aircraft in question. It was a Tornado GR4. They were based out of Lossiemouth up in North Scotland. And they were flying at low level, and you might just be able to see the cockpit. The pilot sits in the front and the navigator sits in the back. And what happened is they're flying through low level and they hit a bird. Now, the poor little bird gets incinerated. So that's over for the bird, but actually it can do quite a lot of damage to the engines because it's quite an intricate kind of system. So it's a serious emergency. So what they did is they punched up to medium level to get themselves some thinking time. And then on the advice of this instructor, we started listening into the conversation between the navigator and the pilot. And the navigator was saying, okay, so we've got this much fuel. We've got these airports nearby. We've got these options, right? And for some reason, the pilot wasn't really listening or wasn't responding to anything the navigator said. And after a while, the navigator changed his language and he said, you have got this much fuel. You have got these airports in this vicinity. You have got these options. And I think what's interesting is if the instructor hadn't told me to listen out for the language, I never would have noticed it. But as soon as he did, it was immediately obvious to me how that navigator was feeling. And maybe it's obvious to you. And feel free to populate the chat with this stuff. But it was obvious to me he was feeling pretty peed off, but also feeling pretty powerless because he'd gone from we to you. So that was a really kind of interesting idea. And, it's worth just listening out to what people say because it will tell you a lot about how they're feeling. But what was really interesting to me is that the words he was using was also influencing how he was feeling. As soon as he switched from we to you, he was giving his power away. He was letting the pilot run the show and he basically relinquished any control and he was in his circle of concern, right? And that's also why he was feeling kind of annoyed. And that's really interesting that the language can affect how we feel. And what's quite extraordinary is that we've probably been using language like that for longer than we realize. And this language can really, make us feel quite powerless. So sort of flip forward a little bit when my son, back to my son, because I can't go more than about 10 minutes without talking about Arthur. But in this photograph, he's about 2 years old. And I remember just after I got back from Afghanistan, actually, I picked him up from nursery. Now, some of you may have a 2-year-old or you may be able to remember what it was like to have a 2-year-old. Think about how articulate a child is at that age, okay? Then they've got words, right? But they're not having sparkling after dinner debate, are they, right? So it's fairly rudimentary, their communication. And this nursery worker, she ran up to me and she said, you've got to hear what Arthur did today. He was playing with this other child and the child dropped their toy and the toy broke. And quick as a flash, Arthur turned around to this child and said, how does that make you feel? I'm imagining you around there going, oh, like that, because that's what I do. But anyway, I was supposed to be very pleased at this display of empathy, but I was actually quite troubled for a couple of reasons. First of all, clearly those are not his words. He's picked that up from somewhere and he's mirroring it very well. But secondly, I had a problem with the particular words he used because he said, how does that make you feel? So just think about those particular words. How does that make you feel? In other words, what we're saying is something or someone has the power to make us feel something that we don't choose to feel and that we might not want to feel. And it's really common to use this kind of language. You'll say, Bob makes me angry. Sheila makes me sad. I left my husband because I couldn't make him happy and all this kind of stuff. And we use this language all of the time. But actually, if you think about it, no one can make you feel anything. And if you need proof of that, think about the last time someone said, oh, cheer up. It might never happen. Did you immediately feel cheerful or did you want to staple things to their forehead? I know what I want to do, okay? So people can't tell us how to feel. And yet the words we are using is telling a different story. And you might say, well, so what? But actually it is important, because the words we use have incredible power. And it's because of this thing called the reticular activating system. Don't worry about that too much. I'm just saying it to sound clever, basically. But what it means is that the brain listens to the words we use, in particular the subconscious. And the subconscious is really good at making things happen when we say them out loud. So that's why if you say, oh, I'm going to really mess up this interview, funnily enough, you will. It's also, funnily enough, why positive affirmations work. And it's also how fortune tellers make a living, because if they put an idea in your head, your subconscious is really good at making it come true. And so that means if we're using disempowering language and we're giving our choices away, we are training ourselves to feel like we've got no control over how we feel. And we're training ourselves to feel powerless. And that is not going to help us feel resilient. But the good news is that if we can train ourselves to feel powerless, then the opposite is also true. We can train ourselves to feel powerful. And I think, a couple of really easy ways to do that is just to switch our language around a little bit. So rather than saying you or they or, he or she, we just switch it on to I or we, because then we are in our circle of influence, because I can do something about what I say or do and think. So rather than saying, Bob makes me angry, you can say, I feel angry when Bob does X, so I'm not expecting you to not have emotions, but just own them, because then you can do something about it rather than being in this kind of circle of concern. So that's the first thing. The second language hack that I discovered is could and should. So it's really interesting. If you listen to a small child, listen to how often they say could versus should. And if we can observe that moment where could kind of vanishes out of our vocabulary, we start using should all the time, don't we? We're like, I should go to the gym. I should have known better. I should have been a better leader, or whatever it is. And I have a couple of problems with that. First of all, when we say should, we're kind of giving ourselves a bollocking. And I don't know about you, but I think we're hard enough on ourselves as it is. But we're also narrowing our options. We're taking our choices away, because we're saying, I should go to the gym. So you're kind of obligating yourself to do something. Whereas if you just switch it for could, suddenly you're kind of bigging yourself up. You're like, oh, I could do that. But also you're widening your choices. I could go to the gym. I could go for a run. So little language hacks like that, once you start to see the way these words are playing with you, you can't unsee it. And once you start to change the words, you actually start to feel differently. And that's because of the cognitive framework. The magic of this is if you change your behaviors, i.e. what you say and do, your thoughts, feelings, and your even your physiology will start to catch up. So you'll start to think more positively. You'll start to feel stronger, and physically you'll start to feel better in yourself. So try it out. Start trying to use more powerful words where you can take some ownership and see how you feel. Even do a power pose if you want to, because that also works. But start using more powerful words, and it might just help. And what's lovely about this is because we tend to mirror each other in our language, you might notice people around you start copying your language. They won't realize they're doing it, and they'll start to feel more powerful. So that is a great way, I think, we can start getting into our circle of influence. Is just start using some more powerful words. But obviously, things are still going to go wrong, okay? Life is not all unicorns and rainbows. So what happens when life is getting difficult? How do we deal with that? And I want to introduce you to a technique that I learned as a mindfulness coach. Now, it comes under many names. If it was a meditation, it'd be called sitting with difficulty. It can also be called acceptance. It can be called distress tolerance. I'm going to call it sitting with discomfort, okay? Now, that might not sound like much fun, but actually it's a really powerful technique because it increases how confident we feel to deal with difficulty. And like I say, it's a mindfulness technique. It's quite a ninja technique, actually. So I'm going to try and bring it to life for you through another story. Okay. So I don't know how many of you here like being in the water, but imagine you're in the water now, okay? And then now imagine that you're under the water and you've got no goggles on. So your face is clear. And then now imagine that you are strapped in to a seat in a 5-point harness. And then imagine you've got a window the size of a cat flap to escape through. That's the dunker. Okay, so this is the training that we all have to do as helicopter crew before we fly over the water, because if you fly over the water and you ditch, the helicopter is pretty good at sinking quite quickly. So you have to be specially trained so that you can get out. So by the way, if you're thinking about going on a helicopter ride over water, I'd suggest you do this training or go in full scuba gear. I'm just saying. But anyway, it's absolutely terrifying. Okay, there are very few people that enjoy this training, and I was not one of them. And I remember being sat on the side of the pool, and I was just petrified. And I didn't know what to do with this fear. So I did the only thing I knew how, and I just started talking, right? So I was kind of on the side of the pool going, okay, I can hold my breath for 30 seconds. I'll be practicing in the bath, and I think you have to be underwater for 12 seconds. But what happens if the thing gets stuck? And what happens if I can't get out of my harness? And what happens if the instructor doesn't notice that I've been stuck? And what happens if someone like punches me in the face? And I was just going on and on and on. And I remember after a while, my friend who was sat next to me said, Sarah, I get it. You're scared. I'm scared too. And I was like, really? You don't seem scared. You seem very calm. And he was like, no, I'm not calm. I just don't think talking about it is really going to help. And I remember kind of thinking at that point, yeah, he's kind of right. You know, we often think you've got to talk about things. And it does help to an extent. But when you kind of end up fueling the, you know, the fear or the fanning the flames, it actually ends up being worse. So I thought, all right, well, I might try what he's doing then. So I decided to sort of sit on the side of the pool quietly like he was. And I kind of just said to myself, I'm scared, actually. And it's okay that I'm scared. And it's okay that I don't like being scared. But this is a feeling, and I can tolerate it. And I can sit with it. And that's what I did. And funnily enough, I started to feel a little bit calmer and a little bit more powerful. I wasn't like totally zen, but it just gave me enough of an edge for me to feel a bit more confident to face what was coming next. And that is what sitting with difficulty gives you. And what it means is, rather than wrestling with our feelings or trying to push them away or fueling them, we just sit with them, and they kind of lose their power over us when we do that. And the reason that it is so effective is because emotions want to be heard, right? If you think about why we have emotions in the first place, they're actually trying to protect us. So think about when we feel regret, okay? It's usually because we've done something that's counter to our values. So that might prompt us to maybe apologize. Or think about if you feel anxious, particularly if you're, you know, anxious at work, that might be a sign that you feel under-resourced to deal with the task ahead. So that might point to the fact that you need to ask for more resource. Or let's say you were feeling angry about something. That might be a sign that maybe you feel like you've been wronged in some way. So you might decide to stick up for yourself or someone else. The point is that our emotions are trying to serve us, even though they're not pleasant. They're trying to serve us. So if we try and drown them out or wrestle with them, they just kind of shout louder. Whereas if we can learn just to sit with them, that's often all we need to do. So try this. Try sitting with discomfort just for 30 seconds, whatever thought or feeling comes up, rather than sort of pushing it away. Sometimes you can just sit with it and acknowledge it, and acknowledge that, yeah, you know what, it's a bit crap right now. I almost think of it as just allowing yourself to grieve just for 30 seconds and allowing you to feel whatever you need to feel in that moment. And then after 30 seconds, we move on. And that's important, because if we sit with it for longer, then we're kind of torturing ourselves, and that's not really helping. So sit with it for 30 seconds or so. Let yourself feel whatever you need to feel, because there's nothing wrong with it. But then do yourself the kindness of letting it go and focusing on something which nourishes you. And that brings me on to the next point, because it is okay to seek out joyful moments, right? And actually, once we've kind of grieved or sat with something, it's a good idea to then focus on something which brings us joy. Now, I'm not talking about toxic positivity. This is a new phrase I've learned recently, which is where we just ignore everything bad and go, la, 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 la. Of course you can't do that. And you definitely can't do that in your profession. But actually, it is okay to be open to and notice the positives, okay? And the important point about that is that that won't happen unless you make a conscious choice to do it, because of the way we're wired. We're wired for survival, not happiness. And that means that we're wired to default to negative thinking. So we have about 5 negative thoughts for every single positive thought that we have. Particularly in your profession, you have to look out for threats all the time. So you're highly tuned at looking for threats. So that means if you're kind of at the mercy of whatever thought pops up, there's a very good chance it's a negative one or a troubling one. And of course, you can sit with it for 30 seconds if you feel that's the right thing to do. But if we want to notice the positive, then we have to sort of be prepared to look a little bit harder for it. And the good news is if you look for it, you tend to find it. So, you know, like I said, they called me Jekyll and Hyde. They called me other things as well, but I don't know what they were because I never listened to the compliments. I only ever listened to the times that I thought people were criticizing me. But if I'd been open to it, I might have been open to the fact that people also called me brave or funny or energetic. I only found that out later when I, you know, opened myself up to this. And you can do the same thing. And it's just about being open to it. So, you know, when you walk out the door, look up and notice the sunrise, or notice the sound of birdsong, or be open to hearing a compliment from someone because you're surrounded by them. In fact, I'm going to embarrass Ed for a moment. This is what CEO of Wound Care says about you all. He says you're utterly inspiring. And I know he's not the only one that thinks that. So I encourage you just to be open to the positive. It's not about denying the negatives, but be open to the positive. Okay, so those are kind of my thoughts on how we can help ourselves to stay resilient during tough times. You know, I'm not saying this is easy, right? And we all know that it's not easy, but these are some of the tips that really, really help me. And honestly, for me, it comes back down to the power of choice. Okay, we can always exercise choice, whether that's putting on some superhero pants, whether that's choosing to sit with a difficult thought, choosing to notice a compliment someone's paid us. It's always about exercising a choice that serves us and then exercising another choice that serves us, and recognizing there'll be times we forget and we get consumed by the choices we don't have. And that's fine. That's what happens. But when you remember, you can pick back up where you left off and you can start exercising choice again. And I know this works because if it's possible to feel powerful in your underwear, then it is possible to feel powerful just about anywhere. So I guess the question I'll leave you with, and I know we've got some time for questions now, but the question I'll leave you with is, what choices could you make that would serve you? And maybe just as importantly is, what superhero pants would you wear if you had to choose? So that's it from me. Ed, back to you for any questions, please.
Sarah, thank you. I'm not going to say absolutely inspiring because I said before, so I'll talk with something else. But a massive thank you, but also thank you to all our delegates out there for your comments, for your kind words. So if you get a chance, have a look back. Some lovely things have been said. And we want to do loads more of this. You know, we did a big questionnaire recently with regards to the clinical leadership program. And a lot of people came back and said, alongside clinical help, support, and that opportunity to network with colleagues, personal development is a really important thing. So if you've enjoyed this, please go to the clp-hub.com and register, and we'll keep bringing this kind of content to you. So are you okay if I crack on with some questions?
Absolutely.
So question one, this has been very useful. Thank you very much. I'll take so much of this to my work tomorrow. However, if I find myself as stressed as I am now in 6 months, what can I do?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't think I can do justice to that question. I mean, I think, you know, okay, so a couple of things. I suppose let me share some information with you first, but I think also it would be worth thinking about who could help you to work through some of these things. But I think the first thing that we need to remember is that, you know, we can train the brain. We can train the brain to let go, you know, so that we're not bogged down by difficult things, by, you know, like, for example, focusing our attention as a force for good. I find mindfulness is really helpful. So all of these things we can train our brains to do to help us to feel a bit more resilient and feel less stressed, okay? But also the brain is lazy and it will resist us. So it might be that you make a start and you do really well for a few weeks and then you kind of just forget and it peters out. So if you find in 6 months' time, actually, I'm still feeling stressed, it might just be that you need to kind of refresh and renew those intentions. Of course, if you've been trying really hard for 6 months and made absolutely no progress, then my suggestion would be speak to someone who can actually help you, you know. speak to a coach or someone that can, actually help you just look at where you can reduce stress in your life. I think one of the most impactful ways to reduce stress is to ditch multitasking and to start unitasking, which is actually something I'm going to be talking about at the roadshow at the end of the month. But we often, particularly women, but people who are in your kind of industries feel like we've got to be everywhere all of the time. And I know you've got to be highly responsive, but we can actually only focus on one thing at a time. And when we try to do this all the time, it is actually very stressful. Now, I'm not saying that you can just kind of focus on one thing and forget about everything else that's going on. But if you can just take a step back and go, right, what's the most important thing right now? And you're probably good at doing this because you're good at triaging. You can do that with the rest of your life when you get home and you've got a million things to do. Rather than telling myself, I should be good at multitasking, you can say, actually, I can only focus on one thing. So what's the one thing I need to focus on right now? Right, I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to get that done. Now I'm going to focus on the next thing. So if you can just simplify it and focus on one thing, actually you do the task better and faster, and you reduce your stress levels. And I'd say that is probably the most effective thing that we can do to reduce our stress in the workplace and at home. But I welcome, any comeback on that. I'm very happy to keep exploring that subject with you.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a lot of similar questions coming through, actually. One of the reasons I think this is so important, and I had this conversation with a colleague earlier, is managing stress over a prolonged period of time is a challenge we hear all the time from our nursing and healthcare professional audience. So it's interesting to see these questions coming through. Question 2 is, how do I deal with setbacks in the workplace under the huge pressure I'm under? Okay,
so I suppose there's a coach in me wants to go back with the question of, how do you currently deal with setbacks? In my experience, we're pretty good at beating ourselves up for this kind of stuff. And this is where I think sitting with discomfort is a useful thing, because sometimes we need to grieve and kind of go, I am really upset with myself, or maybe someone else. Maybe you feel a bit let down by someone and that, had a knock-on effect. I think sometimes we need to just allow ourselves to feel whatever we feel about it, but then we need to give ourselves permission to go, right, how can I move on from this? Where can I focus my attention in a way that's going to serve me now? What could I learn from this? How could this be helping me? It might be 99% of it's unhelpful, but there might be 1% that's helping me. So how could this be helping me? It might be telling me that I need extra training, or I need extra resource, or I need to have a different conversation with someone to say that I'm under too much pressure. I realize a lot of these things are easy to say in the comfort of a lounge and difficult, for you in your workplace. But, thinking about, how can I turn this into positive action to actually make a change? And also bear in mind, you're probably making a change, not just for you, but for everyone else around you, because if you're feeling it, then everyone else is too. And, one voice is not as loud as 20 voices, but you've got to start with somewhere, right? So if you start to say, hey, actually, I experienced a setback at work because I wasn't resourced enough, and this is going to keep happening until we get more resources, then, slowly over time, I hope that people start to pay attention. I feel a bit of an idiot saying all this, because it's very easy to say this, isn't it? But I've got a huge kind of empathy.
It's going to be important to people asking the question, and certainly from the feedback we're getting on the Facebook group, is a lot of people in a similar position. So question 3, and these are tough questions because often our events are clinical. So often there are scientific answers that are quite straightforward, but these seem slightly more challenging. So what is the one thing you could do to have better health and a feeling of well-being? Which seems like a challenging question to me.
The one thing. Can I say 3 things?
You can say 3 things. You absolutely can say 3 things.
So honestly, mindfulness really helped me. And I don't mean you have to meditate for 5 hours a day. I know you don't have time for that. But if you started each day taking 5 mindful breaths, and when I mean that, I just mean breathe in, focus on your breath. Breathe out, focus on your breath. Breathe in, do that, 5 times. Now, in that time, that might take a minute. In that time, your brain will probably run off, Okay, that's what brains do, particularly if you're busy and stressed. Your brain's doing this all the time. Every time your brain scampers off and you start thinking about something that isn't breathing, you bring your attention back to where it needs to be. You might be like, well, what's the point in that? But actually, you're training your brain to have your attention in one place. And that means that the next time you're just overwhelmed with lots of negative thoughts, you can just focus on your breathing. And when you go back to a negative thought or a really unhelpful thought, you come back to your breathing. So it kind of gives you a break in a way. And mindfulness just really helped me to realize that I don't have to engage with that thought. I don't have to give it an audience. I don't have to be hostage to my feelings. I can choose to just anchor myself on my breath. And so I think that one thing of taking 5 mindful breaths every morning, it might seem like, how is this possibly related to my well-being? But I think you're training the most important muscle in your body, which is your mind. And you are taking control over what you're thinking and feeling by deciding where to focus your attention. So that would be the one thing, 5 mindful breaths. Number 2 and 3, sleep and exercise. If you can do those things, I think a lot of this other stuff takes care of itself. But yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Question 4, how would you suggest handling a situation where a more senior colleague communicates badly and this has affected your day?
Yeah. So again, I mean, there's so many directions you could take this in. So first of all, again, I'd start with give yourself permission to feel whatever you need to feel. Okay. And I think often in some ways, I mean, if it was me, I'd probably build up this whole kind of, what's the word? Righteous kind of rage in me, but like, they shouldn't speak to me like that. Actually, when you do that, you're fueling the emotion and making yourself, not making yourself, but you're probably getting more angry or more upset or more anxious. So that's what I mean. Just kind of allow yourself just to feel whatever you need to feel without getting involved in the storyline, and then focus on something else, focus on the work task or whatever, and give yourself some space from the situation. Okay, let those feelings diminish, because they will diminish over time. And then you might come back to the end of the day and go, right, now, is that something I actually need to do something about? Do I need to go and have a conversation with someone and say, actually, the way this person's communicating is, impacting my work, or can I let it go? So again, these are really big questions, and they are not easy things to answer. But that's what I'd say is let yourself feel what you need to feel, get some space from it, focus on something else, and then maybe come back to it later on and go, do I need to do some further action for the greater good for me and the rest of my crew?
Brilliant, thank you. So question 5, I think is for me. Usually sessions are on clinical subjects. This was a great session. How come this has changed? It's quite simple, really. We do loads of research into our audience. We ask people all the time what they want from a content point of view, how they want to get that content. And more our audience is saying alongside clinical, they want personal development. So stress, anxiety, resilience, leadership, communication, business planning. And the whole idea around this clinical leadership program we're launching tonight is to make sure we deliver all that content alongside the clinical stuff, as alongside a safe space for networking. So that's why you guys tell us what you want, and we'll keep delivering it. And if you don't like it, please tell us as well. So question 6, this is probably for me as well. I missed the beginning of this session. Can you tell me more about the CLP and how I join? So the CLP is free and you can join now. I've written it down in front of me, so I keep looking down. It's the clp-hub.com. And the whole idea behind the clinical leadership program that we're doing with Convatec is for ostomy and continence healthcare professionals. And we're trying to provide an environment where healthcare professionals can learn, both from a clinical and from a personal point of view. Live events, we have a whole revalidation area. But as I said earlier, the experience we've had over the last 3 years with the one we've done on lower limb is it becomes a safe space for conversation, for sharing failure, for sharing concern. And it's something that's been a real success. So that's why we're launching it, clp-hub.com, and please feel free to join. Question 7, is it that the brain is lazy, or has it formed a habit that's very strong and brings you back to that place?
Yes, thank you for picking me up on that. it was a lazy way of describing it. So the brain tries to be efficient because it takes up a lot of energy comparatively. It's about 20% of our energy, but it's 2% of the weights of the body. So it tries to be efficient, which means it will try to do what it did last time, because we've got this thing called neural pathways. And every time you do something, for a trigger, a thought, behavior thing, you start to grow these kind of neural pathways. And for you to sort of change direction and do a different trigger, thought, behavior pathway takes effort. And the brain is wired to conserve energy. So it's not lazy, it's just wired to conserve energy. So yes, we will fall back on previous habits. And that's why the brain kind of resists us when we try to do something new. So if your default is to feel or think a certain thing in response to a certain scenario, it will take effort for you to go, I don't have to think like that. I could actually choose to think differently. I could choose to find it funny or find it, ridiculous or whatever. So it is hard, but, I think the important thing is realizing I have a choice and I can decide how to react to things. And every time I choose to react to something in a slightly different way, I'm building a new neural pathway, and over time it will get easier. And I think, there's lots of different studies out there. Some people say it's 3 weeks, some people say it's 3 months. Just start, right? And over time you will find that you can gradually shift those habits to be more helpful ones.
So we're down to our last 2 questions, and then based around the fact that I'm aware you have a long drive ahead of you, you can set off and have a safe.
I'm here for you guys, but yes, thank you.
So question 8, at times you speak up but it feels like no one hears you. What should I do?
Oh, I mean, that breaks my heart to hear that. Gosh, it's hard, right? It's hard. And again, I just feel like I'm not going to do justice to this. I think I'm probably going to, say something that's a bit of a bumper car sticker thing, but like, never give up. Your voice needs to be heard. And even if it's one voice, it's better than no voice. And I think, a lot of it is about keeping the faith. I suppose it's probably important to keep topping up your own reserves, because that sounds like quite a depleting, draining scenario when you feel like, I'm not getting anywhere, right? That's tiring. So I think when you are in a situation which is draining, you have to prioritize self-care, right? And it is so against the grain for people like yourselves because you care for other people. But you can only care for other people if you care for yourself first. So I think, just keep looking after yourself, and also maybe don't be shy of asking people for help, and asking people for what you need from them. So yeah, I mean, gosh, it's a really tricky scenario that you find yourself in. And I'm trying to think of a situation when I was in a similar scenario. I think also maybe one thing is, you might be having more impact than you realize. A lot of people don't shout about the fact that you said something and it impacted them. And I had a boss that used to always shout at me whenever I said anything. But to his credit, he would then eventually fess up that, like, actually I did that because you said this thing, and it, I had to percolate it on it a while, and then I had to pretend it was my idea. But I think, maybe don't, even though you don't necessarily see the end results, you're probably having more impact than you realize. So, please do keep doing what you're doing, because we need people like you to keep speaking up, and you're being really brave. So thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So last question, which lightens everything, is where did you get those awesome superhero pants from?
Well, I got them on Amazon. Thank you for asking. You can get a 6-pack. Not a 6-pack from Amazon. I wish you could order one of those. So that'd be amazing. You can get a 6-pack of pants. And they have Batman and Superman. And I really do advise having a range of them. And sometimes I wear them inside my pants, my trousers, sometimes I wear them outside. Just depends on what kind of day I'm having. So
thank you. You've been a legend. Genuinely, thank you for tonight. I'm looking at the comments come through, and I know it's meant quite a lot to a lot of people out there. So I really appreciate your time and your efforts. The link for the certificate of attendance is now available. So please download that. That counts towards your CPD and revalidation. As I said, please get involved. Tell us what you want from us. Join the new CLP. I'll say it one last time. It's clp-hub.com. And that concludes tonight's event. Massive thank you, Sarah, to you again. Huge thank you to everyone at Competech. This has been an amazing journey over the last 12 months. So thank you for your support and for your trust. And we're just incredibly excited that we've now started something that we're going to develop in the weeks, months, and years ahead. As always, a thank you to my team, both here at WCP, but everyone at Mole Digital. You guys are awesome. So thank you for putting on a fantastic event. And last but not least, to everyone who's taken the time to join us tonight. We're well aware how busy you are. So giving up your precious time means a great deal. You continue to inspire, and we'll continue to do everything we can to support you. Stay safe, stay strong. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.